Welcome to this week's White House History Weekly. There's a long history of American presidents and their fondness for cigars. Today, my good friend John Adams, founder of Liberty Cigars in Alpharetta, Georgia, is going to tell us about some of that history and some unique stories about presidents and their cigar interest, and their bringing them and smoking them even in the White House. Well, John is also the creator of many cigars related to American presidents, and one of my favorites happens to be the George Washington here, which I plan to enjoy this evening. But for now, let's take it to John, and he's going to tell us about presidential history and cigars.
Thank you, Stuart. Cigars have been in residence at the White House as long as the presidents themselves. In fact, the President's Palace, as it was then referred to, was first occupied by President John Adams, who enjoyed cigars for the greater part of his extraordinary life. Adams, like most of his peers and fellow citizens, imbibed cigars for myriad reasons. Often it just depended on the circumstances. Sometimes the occasions were celebratory in nature. Sometimes cigars were a faithful companion in solitude or respite. More often than not, however, cigars were used to alleviate stress. Such was the nature of the job. During the XYZ affair in 1798, in which the young American Republic stood on the precipice of war with France, President Adams was working feverishly to balance the public's anger at the French with the need to move forward with extreme caution. The First Lady, Abigail Adams, worried that her husband was smoking too many cigars and feared he was working to the point of collapse. She needn't have worried too much, however, as her faithful companion lived to be 90 years old, his cigar in hand to the last. Edwin Stanton, President James Buchanan's Attorney General, recalled on the eve of the Civil War that the president smoked a cigar while struggling with the fateful decision to defend the federal arsenal at Fort Sumter. Abraham Lincoln, for his part, did not use tobacco, nor did he drink alcohol. Mostly he drank only water, which he proudly referred to as Adams Ale. But it was clear he was suspicious of those who claimed to have no vice when he said, "It has been my experience that folks who have no vices have very few virtues." President Hoover was perhaps one of the most virtuous presidents to ever occupy the White House. It follows then that, despite being a Quaker, he possessed a few tiny vices. He had the occasional drink, he danced when forced to, and though Quakers are avowed pacifists, he even picked up a gun when he was faced with the prospect of having to defend himself and his beloved wife Lou during the Chinese Boxer Rebellion in 1900. Though he would be found leading the fray in the battle, fortunately, he never had to fire his gun. Hoover faced more than his fair share of stress. Not long after he assumed office, the Great Depression took hold of the nation. And to compound his worries, just 2 months later, the White House caught fire on Christmas Eve. Stressful indeed. According to the White House chief usher, Edwin Ike Hoover, no relation, President Hoover smoked cigars incessantly, consuming 20 a day. Not surprisingly, he preferred his stogies to be very mild. President John F. Kennedy was also a rabid cigar enthusiast. His aides were required to have them on hand, wrapped carefully in aluminum foil to keep them humidified and in good shape. Like Hoover, Kennedy had his share of troubling times. Shortly after he took office, he launched the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which was followed almost immediately by the Cuban Missile Crisis, during which time he was told by his advisors that the entire southern United States could cease to exist. There could be little doubt that the president needed a soothing cigar in that moment. It was not all stress. Cigars on many occasions were celebratory to the presidents. President James Garfield, having won the nomination for President of the United States in 1880, celebrated the good news with friends and a good cigar. Cigars were also the perfect companion in respite and solitude for the presidents. President William McKinley could be found taking a stroll down the streets of Washington, D.C. with a cigar firmly in his clutches. It is said that it was the only exercise he ever got.